Wyoming Territory, 1873, the wind cut sharp across the plains the morning Willa Raines was traded for a mule. She stood barefoot in the dust, arms wrapped around her thin frame, watching her husband tie the reins of a gray pack mule into another man's hand. "Fair trade," he muttered, already turning away. He did not look back, he never did. The cowboy took the reins, but his eyes were not on the mule. They were on Willa. He stepped down from his horse, boots quiet in the dirt. He was tall, sun-browned, maybe in his late 20s, with a strong jaw and a worn hat slung low over green eyes. A rifle was strapped to his saddle, a bouquet of wildflowers tied behind it with a strip of red cloth. "You all right?" he asked. Willa blinked at him. She had not heard a voice speak kindly to her in months, maybe longer. "He said I was no use," she said flatly, voice hollow. "Said a mule would carry more and complain less." The cowboy looked after the man who had disappeared down the trail, mule in tow. "That your husband?" Willa nodded once. He looked back at her, then set the flowers gently on the ground. "Name's Zeke Alcott. I was just looking to buy a mule, not a woman, but I cannot leave you here." Willa stared at him. "You already paid for me." "I did not mean to," he said, "but I will not leave you out here like trash. Come on." "I have a spare horse." She did not move. Her hands trembled. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Zeke said. "You come with me, I will feed you, make sure you are safe, that is all." He did not touch her, he did not even step close. He waited, quiet and still, like he knew she needed space to breathe. Willa finally stepped forward. Her feet hurt on the cold dirt, but she walked toward the horse he pointed to. It was a calm bay mare with gentle eyes. Zeke helped her up without a word. They rode west, through the red dust and dry sage, the silence between them filled only by wind and hoofbeats. Zeke did not ask her questions. He just rode beside her, keeping her within sight, like she was already his to protect. By dusk, they reached a small homestead tucked between two cottonwoods. A one-room cabin, a corral, a well. The porch was just 3 uneven steps and a broken chair. "This is yours," she asked, sliding off the mare. "Built it myself," he said. "Ain't much, but it stands." Willa looked at it. There were no holes in the roof, no broken panes, no shouting coming from inside. It looked like peace. Zeke unsaddled the horses, then handed her the bundle of flowers. "Picked these this morning before heading to town. Did not know why, now I do." Willa took them slowly. Lupine, bluebells, prairie aster. Her fingers closed around the stems. She did not cry. Not yet. Inside, the cabin smelled like cedar and coffee. There was a bed in one corner and a table with 2 chairs. He set a kettle on the stove and lit a fire. "You hungry?" She nodded. She sat at the table while he cooked. Salt pork and beans. He gave her the bigger plate. She ate slowly, her body still expecting to be struck for it. Zeke sat across from her but did not stare. He ate like any man would, quiet and grateful. After supper, he stood. "You can have the bed." "I will take the floor." "I do not mind the floor." "I do," he said. Willa did not argue. Her bones ached too much to fight. She lay in the bed, stiff and silent, while he rolled out a blanket in the corner. The fire burned low. Outside, night settled across the land. Zeke's voice came soft from the shadows. "You have a name?" "Willa." "That is a good name." She closed her eyes. She dreamed of her mother's garden and of a man with flowers and steady hands. The days passed quiet. She cleaned the cabin, sewed up a torn curtain, and made cornbread from the supplies he had. Zeke repaired the chicken coop and chopped wood. He never touched her. He came home one afternoon with lumber in the wagon bed and a hammer slung through his belt. "What is that for?" Willa asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "You need a proper porch," he said. "A place to sit and breathe." She watched him work. He built slow and steady, measuring twice, cutting once. Every board laid down like a promise. By evening, he had a flat platform of wood in front of the door, big enough for 2 chairs. He brought one out and set it down. "You built this just for me?" He looked at her. "Yes." Willa sat. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and fire. She could see clear across the valley. For the first time in years, she did not feel like a ghost. Zeke sat beside her. He held a cup of coffee in one hand, his other resting on his knee. "Why are you this kind to me?" she asked. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he does not want to lose. "Because someone should have been a long time ago." Her chest ached, not with pain but with something that felt like hope. Like maybe there was a life on the other side of all that hurt. She nodded toward the flowers still in the tin cup on the windowsill. "No one ever brought me flowers before. I will keep bringing them," he said. "As long as you want them." Willa turned her face toward the sky. It was quiet out there, but not empty. She felt the weight of the world shift just a little. And beside her, Zeke sat still and warm, solid as the porch beneath their feet. The porch boards creaked beneath Willa's steps as she swept the morning dust away with a bundle of willow switches tied tight at one end. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridge, but light was rising slow across the cottonwoods, casting long shadows over the yard where Zeke stood hitching their small wagon. "You heading out early?" she asked, leaning on the broom handle. He turned with a nod, brushing his hands on his trousers. "Need to check the lower pasture, see if that fence line held through last night's wind. A few rails were loose yesterday." She glanced toward the foothills. "You want help? I'd welcome the company if you're up for the ride." Willa tied up her hair with a length of twine, fetched her shawl, and climbed into the wagon without another word. They rode in silence for a while, breeze tugging at her sleeves, the horses walking slow and steady. The land stretched wide and golden, dotted with sagebrush and sun-bleached rocks. A pair of magpies flew low across the ruts ahead of them. Zeke tapped the reins gently. "I keep meaning to ask, do you know anything about canning?" She looked at him sideways. "Some. My mama taught me." "Why? Got a cellar full of jars I've never used. Wasn't much point before." He cleared his throat. "But I was thinking maybe we try storing up this year, make ready for winter proper." She didn't answer right away. Then, "I'd like that." They reached the fence before the sun was high. Zeke jumped down and walked the length, testing posts with a firm push and replacing a splintered rail. Willa followed, gathering stray nails and pried up scraps for burning. She found a patch of wild mint growing near the stream bed and tucked a few stems into her apron pocket. As they worked, a quiet ease settled between them, not the kind born of silence but of understanding. He didn't rush her. She didn't hover. They moved like people who'd learned to leave each other room. On the ride back, Zeke rubbed his jaw with the back of his wrist. "There's a harvest dance next week in town. Folks bring pies, play fiddle, make fools of themselves under lanterns." Willa watched the reins in his hands. "I've never danced. You'd be welcome to come. You don't have to dance unless you want to." She smiled without showing teeth. "I don't own a dress fit for town." "Well," he said, glancing at her for a moment before looking forward again, "I've got some credit at the mercantile, if you wanted one." The wagon bumped along the ruts, the horses shifting their weight with each turn. Willa traced the grain of the bench seat with her thumb. "I've never had anything of my own," she said. Zeke's voice was quiet. "Then maybe it's time you did." That afternoon, he took the mule into town and returned with a bolt of cornflower blue calico, a sack of flour, and 2 silver hair combs wrapped in clean cloth. He didn't hand them to her directly. Just set them on the table and went back outside to tend the chickens, as if it weren't a gift but a matter of course. Willa unfolded the fabric slowly, the color catching the light like water in a wash basin. She held the combs in her palm, their simple curves cool against her skin. That evening, she brought out her needle and thread and began to sew by lantern light, her stitches careful and even. Zeke sat nearby, mending the leather harness with his head bowed. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. When the dress was done, she laid it across the bed and stood back, arms crossed. Zeke looked up from his work, his gaze resting on the fabric, then shifting to her face. "I reckon that's the prettiest color I've ever seen." She didn't blush, but her eyes softened. "It might be too fine for a barn dance." "Not for you," he said. She pressed her lips together, not to hide anything, but to hold something still inside her that felt too new to name. The wind picked up after dark, whispering through the eaves. She closed the shutters, then lingered at the window, watching the moon rise over the hills. Zeke leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. "You ever seen the Pacific?" She turned. "Only in a book." "I was thinking," he said, "someday if you wanted I'd take you west. Just to see it." She didn't answer right away. Then she stepped closer and touched his shoulder gently, like someone reaching for something they hadn't believed would stay. "I'd like that," she said, and he nodded like a promise had just been made and he meant to keep it. The night of the harvest dance arrived with the scent of frost riding in on the wind. Willa stood at the edge of the barnyard, her fingers resting lightly on the folds of her dress. The hem brushed her ankles, the fabric rustling like dry grass with each breath of breeze. She'd braided her hair back from her face and fastened the silver combs just above her ears. She wore no paint on her cheeks, but her eyes held a quiet brightness that hadn't been there months before. Zeke stepped out from the cabin, glancing toward her as he adjusted the collar of his clean shirt. He'd shaved that morning, his jawline bare and sunburned beneath the edge of his hat. His boots were freshly polished, though scuffs still clung to the toes like they always would. "You ready?" he asked. Willa nodded, but her grip on the skirt tightened slightly. "I haven't been around that many people since I left Kansas." He offered his arm, not as instruction, but invitation. "You'll stay close to me, nobody'll crowd you." She took it, her hand light against the crook of his elbow, and they climbed into the wagon together. The road into town was quiet, the sky open and deepening toward dusk. They passed a line of cottonwoods where children had tied strips of colored cloth to the branches. Willa watched them flutter past. "I used to think I'd never leave that farm," she said. "Didn't know anything else existed past the edge of the wheat fields." Zeke looked ahead, hands steady on the reins. "Some folks never do." "I didn't know how to leave," she added, voice low. He didn't look at her then. "Just said, you don't need to explain." The sound of fiddle music met them before they saw the lanterns. The schoolhouse had been cleared of desks, windows glowing gold from inside. A few wagons already lined the edge of the field, and someone had strung pine boughs along the fence. The scent of roasted apples and wood smoke hung in the air. Zeke tied the team and offered her his hand again. She stepped down carefully, her boots sinking just a little into the soft earth. Inside, the room was warm, crowded with neighbors Willa didn't recognize, ranchers, their wives, a pair of elderly men playing checkers in the corner. A girl no older than 12 spun past in a whirlwind of gingham, laughing as her brother chased her. A woman near the stove looked up and smiled. "Even in Zeke, you brought someone new," Zeke nodded. "This is Willa." The woman offered her hand. "I'm Ruth Cadell. My husband's the one playing the fiddle, though he ain't never kept time proper in his life." Willa shook her hand, surprised at the firm grip. "It's nice to meet you." "You're welcome here," Ruth said. "We all come from somewhere hard." Willa glanced at Zeke, and he gave a subtle nod like he knew she needed that moment to settle. They didn't dance at first. Zeke fetched them coffee and a slice of bread pudding from the long table against the wall. They sat together on the bench near the entrance, watching the way neighbors greeted one another, how laughter came easy when no one was afraid. A boy near the hearth began to sing a ballad, his voice thin but sure. Willa leaned in to hear better, her shoulder brushing Zeke's. He didn't shift away. "Do you ever miss being alone?" she asked. "I've had enough of it to last me," he said. She nodded slowly. "I used to think I preferred it. But I think I was just trying to disappear." He turned toward her, his expression unreadable except for something softened in the eyes. "You're not invisible now." She looked down at her hands. "I still wake up sometimes thinking I'm back there." "That he'll come through the door." "He won't," Zeke said. "And if he tried, he wouldn't make it past the gate." She met his gaze. "You'd stop him?" "I'd end him." There was no heat in his voice, just a quiet certainty that settled over her like a blanket drawn up in the cold. After a while, someone called out for another round, and couples moved to the center of the room. Zeke stood, then offered her his hand again. "You don't have to," he said. "I want to," Willa answered. He led her slowly onto the floor. The fiddle struck up a soft reel, nothing too fast. He kept his palm at the small of her back, not pressing, just a steady shape she could lean into. She followed his lead, uncertain at first, then steadier as each step found rhythm. Her breath caught once when he spun her gently, but he caught her before she could stumble. She laughed, surprised at herself. "You're not so bad at this," he said. "I'm not so bad at a few things," she answered, breathless. They danced until the lanterns burned low and the air inside the schoolhouse turned thick with warmth. When they stepped out into the night, the stars were sharp above, cold and endless. Willa slipped her hand into Zeke's as they walked back to the wagon. "I felt real tonight," she said, voice quiet. "You were," he said. They rode home without much talk, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. When they reached the cabin, he helped her down and didn't let go right away. She looked up at him, the moonlight catching on the edge of his features. "I'm not frightened of you," she said. "You never need to be," he said. She stepped forward, her hand resting over his heart. "You've given me more than I knew how to ask for." He covered her hand with his own. "You're not done receiving yet." Inside, the fire had gone to embers, but the warmth still lingered. She didn't go to the bed right away. Instead, she stood by the window, watching the horizon. Zeke moved to stand beside her, close now, not brushing but near enough that she could feel the heat of him. "I think I'd like to stay," she said. He didn't ask for clarity, didn't need to. "Then stay," he said. And she did. The first frost glazed the grass 2 days after the dance. Zeke rose early, as always, but found Willa already outside in the lean light of dawn, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, steam rising from a tin mug in her hands. "Coffee?" he asked, stepping onto the porch. "Made it before the fire burned out," she said. Offering him the cup she hadn't yet sipped from, he took it, their fingers brushing. "You sleep all right," she nodded, then looked toward the corral. One of the hens started laying again. "That right?" She left the egg in the woodpile. He smiled, just a flicker. "Guess she wanted to keep it warm." They stood quiet a while, watching the sky shift from gray to pearl. A pair of deer moved along the tree line, their steps silent among the frost-bitten grass. Later that morning, Willa dragged the washtub from behind the cabin and filled it with well water. She built a small fire just off the porch and set the pot to boil. Zeke was mending a broken hinge on the barn door but looked up when she hoisted the heavy kettle. "You don't have to do everything today." "I want to," she said. "I've got dirt in the seams of every dress I own." He walked over, wiping his hands on a rag. "There's a cedar box in the attic. Belonged to my mother, might still have her lavender soap tucked inside." She blinked. "Why haven't you used it?" Didn't seem right. She always said it ought to be saved for good days. Willa followed him inside. The attic was just a crawl space above the rafters, and Zeke lifted himself up with practiced ease. She held the lamp steady as he passed down a small wooden chest, its corners worn smooth. Inside, wrapped in a linen scrap, were 3 bars of handmade soap and a comb carved from bone. Willa touched the edge of the comb with reverence. She have long hair, down to her waist. Used to braid it before Sunday church. Willa set the soap beside the tub and let her fingers linger in the water as it warmed. The scent drifted up clean, sharp, with a softness beneath it she hadn't expected. She rinsed each garment with care, her hands red from the cold. Zeke brought her a towel without being asked. By midday, the wind picked up, and they strung the washed clothes between the porch posts. Willa stepped back, wiping her palms on her skirt. "I forgot how bright things look when they're clean," she said. Zeke leaned against the porch rail. "Makes the whole place seem different. Feels like a home," she said. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. That evening, she found the ledger tucked away in the cabinet above the hearth. She brought it to the table and opened it slowly. "You keep records?" "Used to," he said, coming over. "When I thought I might turn this place into something profitable." She ran her hand down the page. "You stopped. Didn't seem worth the ink." She fetched the inkwell and a fresh quill. "Maybe it's time to start again." They sat together, her copying the new hens and supplies, him correcting the spelling of a town she'd never been to. He didn't tease, just pointed gently, and she wrote it again without bristling. Later, she boiled potatoes and mashed them with butter while he stirred stew over the fire. When they sat down to eat, she passed him the salt without needing to be asked. "You ever think about building another room?" she said, carefully spearing a piece of carrot. "I have. For what?" "I was thinking maybe a sewing area or a place to keep books." "You have books in a trunk under the bed," she blinked. "You never said. You never asked." She rose after supper, pulling the trunk from beneath the bed with both hands. Inside was a small stack, a Bible, a volume of poems, an old history of the West, and a worn copy of Ivanhoe. She held the last one up. "This yours, my father's. He read it to me when the snow came too deep to ride out." She opened to the first page. The handwriting inside was careful, signed in ink, Jonathan Alcott, 1844. "You think he'd mind if I read it?" "I think he'd be glad someone did." The fire burned low while she read aloud, her voice halting at first, then steadier. Zeke leaned back in his chair, boots crossed at the ankles, eyes half closed. She reached the end of a chapter and glanced up. "You still awake?" "Barely," he said, "but I'm listening." She closed the book and set it on the table. "Maybe tomorrow I'll try baking again." He opened one eye. "Hope it's better than last time. It won't catch fire again, I promise." He chuckled once, deep in his chest. "Then I'll look forward to it." Outside, the wind had settled. The sky was clear. Willa stood, crossing the room to draw the curtain. She paused by the window, her reflection faint in the glass. "You ever think about what kind of life you'd have had if things had gone different?" Zeke didn't answer right away. Then, "No use in that. I've got the one I want now." She turned. "Even with me here, especially with you here." She crossed the room slowly, then reached out and took his hand. He didn't move, just let her fingers rest there, warm and sure between his own. "Then I guess this is the life I want too." And neither one said another word. They didn't need to. The snow came early that year, blanketing the land before the last of the pumpkins had softened in the field. Willa stood beside the stove, warming her hands over the open door as the wind howled against the cabin walls. Zeke was kneeling by the hearth, coaxing flame from cedar bark with slow, practiced breaths. "You think winter will stay long?" she asked, watching him stir the embers until they caught. "Likely. The cattlemen say the passes are already thick with drifts. Train might not run again till spring." She leaned her hip against the table. "I never saw snow stick in November before." He added a log, then straightened, wiping his palms on his trouser legs. "High plains do what they want. Out here, the calendar doesn't mean much." Willa reached for the kettle and poured water over the dried mint she'd gathered weeks before. The scent filled the room, clean and sharp. She handed Zeke a cup, then turned to the window. The glass was fogged near the edges, the world beyond it dim and white. "I've been thinking," she said. Zeke lifted his eyes. "I want to dig the root cellar deeper. If we're staying through winter, we'll need more room for flour and preserves." He took a sip, then nodded once. "I'll help you reinforce the beams. We'll need to brace that back wall." Willa smiled faintly. "You say that like it's already decided." "It is," he said. The next morning they bundled in coats and shawls and broke through the frozen earth with spades and pickaxes. The ground fought them, cold and stubborn, but they didn't stop. Zeke built a frame from leftover timber, and Willa packed stones into the corners to keep the frost from creeping in. By the third day, her fingers were blistered and her back ached, but when they stepped into the finished space, lantern light flickering against new shelves and a smoothed dirt floor, she felt something catch in her chest. Zeke touched the top beam. "This'll hold. Come spring, we can build on for storage." She didn't answer right away. "Then, I want to plant corn next year and beans, maybe squash down near the fence." "You thinking long-term now?" "I've stopped thinking in months," she said. "I think in seasons." That night after supper, she sat beside the fire threading buttons onto a strip of muslin. Zeke was carving a new handle for the drawknife, the curl of wood falling soft to the floor. "You ever think about teaching?" he asked. She looked up. "Teaching what?" "Whatever you want. You've got sharp hands and a good eye. Some of the ranch families send their children to town come spring. They could learn from someone like you." Willa's jaw tightened slightly. They'd ask questions about where I came from, they might. But they'd also see what you've built. She set the muslin down. I don't want to be pitied. No one would, he said, but you're not the same woman who stepped off that trail months ago. She glanced toward the door, the latch secured, the snow curling against the bottom edge. No. I'm not. Zeke rose and crossed to her, crouching beside the chair. You've grown roots here, Willa. You've made this place live. She touched the side of his face, her thumb brushing the bone just beneath his eye. So have you. They didn't speak after that, not for a long while. The fire cracked gently, and the wind outside softened as the night deepened. When she stood, Zeke followed her to the bed, and neither of them looked away. They lay close beneath the quilt, her body curved into his, the silence deep with understanding. No promises spoken, none needed. By late winter, the snow began to recede in patches. Willa tapped the maple near the creek and boiled the sap down into syrup. Zeke repaired the wagon wheel and tightened the tack in preparation for the thaw. Together they mapped the garden rows with sticks and twine, measuring by hand. One morning she found him near the barn holding a small box wrapped in oilcloth. He handed it to her without speaking. Inside was a brooch simple pewter shaped like a sprig of prairie grass. On the back was etched a single word, home. Willa traced the letters with her finger. Did you make this? Took me weeks. She looked up slowly. Why? Because I knew, he said, and I wanted you to know too. She touched his chest just above the heart. I do. They were married the first Sunday after the thaw under the cottonwoods where the creek split the field. Ruth Cadell brought bread, and her husband played a tune on his fiddle that carried sweet across the wind. A handful of neighbors came, bringing jars of jam and bolts of cloth, and someone hung wild plum blossoms from the porch. Willa wore a calico dress stitched with green thread. Zeke wore his father's vest, buttons polished to a faint shine. They said their vows with hands clasped, eyes steady. There were no grand declarations, only quiet certainty. By summer the garden was thick with green shoots. The hens nested daily, and the cellar shelves stood full. Willa taught 3 children to read by the edge of the porch, their voices rising as they sounded out each word. Zeke built a small shed beside the barn for tools and gave her the cabin's front room for sewing and books. One evening, as the sun fell behind the ridge and the wheat swayed golden in the field, Willa stood on the porch, a child's reader tucked beneath her arm. Zeke came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. You look like you belong here, he said. She leaned back against him. I do. And together, they watched the light fade from the sky, the land quiet and full beneath it, their hands twined with the promise of all that still lay ahead.